Ladies and gentlemen, let's RedGamer.com video. Let's discuss Steam, shall we? They're updating the early access rules and guidelines for developers. About bloody time. Seriously, this is beyond the joke at this point. I think many developers, many gamers, and pretty much all members of the press had gotten wind of the frankly ludicrous fact that Valve hadn't really been policing the early access situation. And while early access is certainly not the only issue Steam has at the moment, and you're probably aware of some of the other ones, for example, over censorship of indie developers, when they, for example, they'll moderate their own forums and so on. You're probably aware of that, where they'll even use like DMCA notices and basically very harsh moderation of their forums to pretty much just censor bad and negative publicity. You've got, of course, a lot of shovelware where developers will put on a ridiculous amount of really old titles, with basically flooding the Steam store, and sometimes those titles won't even work correctly with modern OSs and so on and so forth. But early access has definitely been a major problem. Essentially, it's a way to invite customers to get involved with the game that you're developing, so you can basically get feedback as the game is being created and ensure that it's the best outcome for the customers and the fans. In other words, it's supposed to be a symbiotic relationship, theoretically, and some games definitely do this really well. For example, Terraria and other titles, you know, they're going to consistently get access, and some don't necessarily call it early access, but for all intents and purposes, a lot of titles, even Minecraft, technically was kind of an early access type of idea. Of course, that's not necessarily conducive to the Steam debate, but still, you get the basic gist. The idea is that there is an expectation by customers that you will continue development, say Steam. In other words, they want to have a product that's finished, but they want to feel that they are contributing to the game's development. They feel that if they spend that $17 or whatever your game costs, that money is going to be pushed towards the development of the title, and that you are not just going to abscond with it and just say toodaloo, thanks for the cash. So one of the rules for this, actually, and this one's quite strict, and I'm sure this one is going to cause a lot of debate. Don't launch an early access if you cannot afford to develop with very few or no sales. This one's pretty obvious, right? It's basically saying that at the very least you need to be able to complete the game to a degree. So they basically say that there's no guarantee that your game will sell as many units as you anticipate. If you're counting on selling a specific number to survive and complete the game, are you sure that, you know, that might not be really what's going to happen? Are you willing to continue to develop the game without sales, and are you willing to seek other forms of investment? One sticking point to this, many consider early access to be almost like a crowdfunding. And although technically it's not, obviously you do have Kickstarter, and Kickstarter has its own problems. We know that Kickstarter support has been a little bit lower, and one of the reasons for this has been early access. So I definitely think that from the perspective of indie developers, and probably from consumers as a general rule, we're probably going to get two different perspectives on this. Well, one where people are going to say, well, hey, you know what? We appreciate that. We want like a full game regardless. And others who are going to say, well, you know what? The reason for early access, one of the reasons that we liked early access is so we can actually help people complete the projects if they didn't have that much cash. So I guess we're going to have to see how that one really plays out. Next, make sure that expectations make sure you set expectations properly everywhere you talk about the game, should I say. In other words, if you're going to deliver a series of updates which is going to completely change the way that a title plays, or save files break, or whatever the case may be, you need to tell the consumer that. So you can't just say that you know, in one little tiny paragraph on the corner of your website. It has to be anywhere that you sell access to your game, anywhere you sell Steam keys. Next, make sure that if you're launching early access, it is a playable game. It cannot just be a tech demo. It can't just be a basic concept with nothing else. It can't just be an area and that's it. Sure, if it's a sandbox, great, but they're saying, there has to be some clear calls to action. There can't just be maybe a default gun model and that's it. You can't have gravity that doesn't work on one section just because you haven't coded it in. It has to be playable. Basically, their point is if you're trying to test out a concept and you haven't figured out what players are going to do in your game, it's too early. You might want to start giving out keys to select fans and get input from small and focused groups before you post your title on early access. At a bare minimum, you need videos of gameplay. This is a really big problem, by the way, with a lot of titles. You're probably familiar with titles like Grass Simulator, which are quite simply taking the piss. Not only are they sometimes broken, there's functionality that's just simply not even working if you click on the menu, at least when I last looked. But for the most part, there's no real cause. Is it a game? Maybe, but in the loosest possible sense. You can argue that yes, it's early access, and you could be honest about that, but I think that's kind of getting to the point where it's completely and utterly taking the piss, to be totally and utterly honest. Next, and finally, do not launch in early access if you had finished in development. If you have all of the gameplay defined, and you're just looking for bug testing, then early access is not the right place for you, says Valve. You want to send out keys to customers or maybe internal play testing. Basically, the purpose of early access is for you and I, consumers, to be able to tell the publisher, the developer, you know what, we think this weapon needs some adjustment, or we think that there needs to be extra levels in the game, or we think that this needs to be changed. In other words, we can still have impact on the title, because that's kind of the whole purpose of it. Us saying, well, hey, you know what, if you press E on this particular section to try and use this weapon rather than space, it causes the game to lock up because you've kind of got a little bug in your code. That's not really having a real substantial, how can I put this, impact on how the game is developed. That's just telling them there's a bug, which isn't really what early access was intended for. My personal opinion on this is that I do quite like the ideas and the basic changes. The bottom line is, with early access, with Kickstarter and any of these types of projects, you are taking a risk. You do not know if the game that you are backing is going to live up to your expectations simply because, well, you're basically living on faith. But I do feel clearer rules are important. I feel that there are some issues still with the Steam platform which are inherently need to be fixed. The whole moderation of the forums is definitely one massive problem. The fact that there is quite a lot of shovelware, and to be honest with you, games need some level of quality control. Now, one can argue that Steam cannot monitor every single title that is on their platform, and it is arguable that they are a store and there's definitely a stance there to be had, but at the same time you are advertising a product, so some level of discretion. And if you are told, and there is a lot of stink, that this product is faulty, then surely you as a retailer have some level of, well, responsibility there. It's a very tricky situation, to be totally honest with you, but as a platform, Steam now are starting to have more and more competition. They certainly are still the largest. And many websites, for even Amazon, Green Man Gaming, various other ones, they do sell keys to Steam at the end of the day. However, Origin is becoming more robust. Uplay is there. Personally, I don't really like it. If I had to be totally honest, I've never really liked Uplay that much. And then, of course, you've got other websites like Humble Bundle, which obviously sometimes are selling Steam keys, not always, however. And of course, the Zura and, well, GOG, which of course CD Projekt Red are really starting to get behind and push. And, well, I suppose that's pretty obvious considering the state and the relationship of their company with GOG, so it's a bit of an obvious statement. But still, so Valve just can't lay back and just let these guys have more trust. And the benefit, of course, of GOG is the fact that, well, it's DRM free, which is definitely a plus. It's a bit of an odd state of affairs, to be honest, in PC gaming. Things are moving forward. Kickstarter, of course, we know, just from analysts and just looking at the basic state of affairs of Kickstarter a couple of years ago, especially even last year, there were a huge amount of projects. There were massive games and massive projects on Kickstarter, and people were backing more of them. This year it's a bit different. There's less cash being put on campaigns on Kickstarter. One can argue that there's a multitude of different reasons. One, people are just maybe not getting sick of Kickstarter, but kind of letting the wave pass a little bit. Some of it was also because of Steam Early Access and other such services, and to another degree, there are less Kickstarter-ish type of projects around. So there's always that. Anyway, it's been a bit of a mixed bag, this one. For the most part, I do like all of the changes. The only one that I think could cause some contention and some strife is the, well, you need to be able to develop the game, afford the cash basically, even if you make no sales. It's not that I have anything against it, I like the principle, but at the same time I do think for some, let's say some developers who are pretty much on the edge, it's going to be a sticking point, and they may have all of the faith in the world. The problem is, of course, you also get those who are going to abuse the system, and that's the big problem. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.